And I just want to say thank you again to all of our NKD panelists. I think that we really were able to see a great perspective about what your experiences have been like in the United States and what they've been like so far. So thank you so much for being so open with all of our attendees. And with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage our three panelists from the ETA community. They are all alumni. Our first panelist of the day is Dr. Erin Pooley. And so Dr. Erin Pooley is an assistant professor in the Department of English Literature and Language at Soonchungyang University in Asan, Korea. He's currently here in the South Korea, and his research interests include the sociolinguistics of leisure practices among non-Koreans working and studying in Korea. And he is also interested in cross-cultural and cross-linguistic interactions in digital spaces. He was a 2009 to 2010 ETA who was placed in Cheonan, and he volunteered at the Heavenly Dream School, which is an NKD boarding school in Cheonan, which you'll find out a little bit more about in our panel. And our second panelist of the day is Patrick Cho. Patrick is currently serving as a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Singapore. He is a 2013 to 2015 ETA alumni, and he served in Gwangju and in Seoul. And during his grant, he served as the ETA coordinator for the HANA Center in Gwangju. And during his time, he also was able to coordinate a conference for all of the volunteers. And for future reference, HANA Center is a NKD counseling center, and there are many that are located around the peninsula where NKD's students can go and access a variety of services. And lastly, our third panelist is Joshua Levitt. Josh is an incoming psychology PhD student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He plans to study how to foster social emotional skills in students from diverse backgrounds in school. And he is our newest alumni from 2018 to 2020, stopping with COVID last year. And he was placed in Koje Island and in Seoul. In his second year, he served at Uridu School, which is an alternative school for North Korean refugees and their children. And so with that, I would like to welcome to the stage our three ETA alumni panelists. Hello, everybody. Okay.
Hey, Isabel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can I get a mic check from Josh real quick?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Awesome.
Okay, great.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this panel. I just want to get us started by talking about how you got involved with the NKD community. And I want to see if there was any background that you had working with this community before you came to Fulbright. And I want to start off first with our oldest alumni, who I think has a very interesting story to share, which is Dr. Pooley.
Thank you, Isabel. So our ETA cohort, so, this feels like a lifetime ago, in 2009, at the outset, there were 5 of us in Cheonan, and we discussed volunteer options and other things that we wanted to do together as a group. And we all agreed to find a way to interact with an NKD community, and ideally nearby. We're relatively close to Seoul, and we knew that there were opportunities in Seoul, but that was mainly on the weekends. So we were looking at something that we could do on the weekdays, something that was close to us. So we started asking around and found a boarding school called the Heavenly Dream School, which hosted around 50 NKDs, ranging in age from early primary school to late secondary school. Fortunately, one of our ETA cohort in our group of 5 spoke fluent Korean, which allowed us to contact the school and ask if there were any ways that we could get involved, to contribute in any way. So after our cold call with the managers at the school, we arranged to teach evening classes on weekdays and then take part in any extracurricular activities that the school hosted.
Wow, thank you. And was that that's something that you found on your own, which I think is a little bit different from maybe the experience that Patrick has in his experience working with NKD students. Patrick, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, actually. I have a personal connection to North Korea, which is my grandparents were from the North and then fled the country after it was divided in 1945. And so I grew up hearing a little bit about North Korea, but a very particular historical version of North Korea. And so really, I'd say the first time that I really became aware of certainly the program and the modern defector community was on my grant. There was a presentation done during orientation by one of the Fulbright researchers who came down from Seoul and shared more about both their research project and then more about kind of at that point a still relatively new volunteer opportunities with ETAs and defector communities throughout various cities in South Korea. And my interest was piqued immediately, in part because of the family history. And from there, me and some other folks in my particular cohort wanted to both volunteer and then also try throughout the course of the year to kind of link up some of these different efforts throughout the country.
Thank you for sharing. For those who maybe don't know or are not as familiar with our ETA program, we typically have a 6-week orientation program where you learn a little bit about your job, but you also learn about the extracurricular activities that are associated with the program. And so that is what Patrick was referring to. Josh, what was your experience like getting involved with the NKD community as a Fulbrighter, and did you have any experience before coming to Fulbright?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I actually did have experience. After my freshman year, I had this really great opportunity to come to Korea through my university to do a program called Duke Engage. And that program actually centered on 2 kind of issues in South Korea, one being multiculturalism, and then the other one being the NKD community. And at that time, I didn't know a lot, honestly, about the NKD community and about Korea in general, and actually didn't even have a passport. So I had to get a passport, which was very fun. And when I came to Korea, South Korea, I was really nervous, but I was really excited to learn more about these kinds of issues. And I actually got to teach for about a month at an NKD school in Yeoju, a really small one. And I learned a lot in that summer. And so that kind of really, I guess, made me aware of the kind of issues that NKD people were experiencing. And so when I went back to Duke to kind of finish my next 3 years, actually founded a student group at Duke. And then 2 of the students that I taught that summer, they really expressed interest in visiting the US because I talked a lot about the US and they wanted to see the US. So me and about 7 other students decided that we're gonna make that happen. So we raised about $6,000 to bring those 2 students to Duke and have this amazing kind of week where they were experiencing kind of college life. So we took them to some classes. We were showing them what an American university experience might look like. And we also gave them a kind of a space and a medium to tell their story in the way they wanted to, because, of course, we could say as much as we wanted, but it was really their story. And that was really, really meaningful. And so that kind of experience really prompted me to come back to Korea, and I applied to Fulbright. And my first year I was teaching elementary, but then the second year I was placed at an NKD school, and it just kind of became full circle because my Duke University actually had a program there just weeks before I arrived. So I saw pictures on the wall of some Duke students, and it was really interesting. And so I came to Fulbright really to kind of deepen my understanding, because I had already had a little bit of understanding and had done a little bit of advocacy work, but I wanted to deepen that, learn more, and kind of work full time at an NKD school. So I did that for about a year.
Thank you for sharing. It's like when I hear everyone's stories, I think it's so different, and maybe it's because of the years, maybe it's not, but I think at the core of the Fulbright program is this idea of cultural exchange and mutual understanding. And I think that the students get to learn a lot, but I kind of want to hear also about what was your experience teaching? Was it more teaching or was it cultural exchange? What was it like? How did you have any preconceived notions of what the NKD community members were like when you started working with the community? And I think we'll start off with Patrick on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. And I am a little sheepish to admit this now, but I definitely had a lot of, as you said, preconceived notions before starting the program. So I didn't really have much of a background other than, some version of family history with South Korea, or certainly with the North Korean defector community. And so I think it's true sort of writ large that a lot of the discussion about North Korea kind of reduces it to a certain visually arresting kind of images, whether that's, the Arirang Games or, Lee Chun-hee, the kind of famous news announcer from North Korea, whatever it might be. There's a narrative that focuses on certain elements of North Korea. And prior to coming to Fulbright and coming to the South, I had read a little bit about the struggles in the 1990s with the famine and the political system, but it was still a very sort of surface level understanding. And then coming to the orientation program, learning more about what Fulbright did with the defector community in the South, we spent a good deal of time talking about both the journey of defectors from the North, getting to the South in most cases, and then also the struggles to readjust to, or to adjust to life in South Korea, both culturally, linguistically, but also technologically. And so I will kind of confess that a lot of those stories were at the forefront of my mind because I had no real reference point before I met with my defector partner. And having those images in my mind, I will never forget meeting. I had a very particular image of what this was going to be like. And then I met my defector partner, who was this very stylish woman who came in having honey butter chip, which was a kind of a fad food at the time, in one hand, and then playing a game on her smartphone in the other. And I remember being sort of taken aback and thinking, oh, this is not what I was expecting. And then I introduced myself, and I don't think I quite looked like what she thought an American would look like, especially with the last name of Cho. And she kind of had this look on her face like, oh, who is this person? And so I think as part of the experience, it was, the first step is sort of setting aside those mental preconceptions that you have one about the other, and getting to deal with each other as people. That's really key. And it's a good lesson for work, not just with the North Korean defector community, but for the Fulbright program at large, because that's part of the mission.
Oh, thank you. I think, yeah, preconceived notions and what we see before we actually get to meet people is kind of what colors maybe our initial idea of what they're supposed to be. But it's good that you were able to meet somebody who was a part of the community and able to see a little bit past maybe what we see in the media and books and things like that. Aaron, what was your experience like meeting people from the NKD community? Did you teach? Did you volunteer? What did you think that your experience was like?
Yeah, well, I think the Fulbright program back in 2009 was a little bit different in terms of what the expectations were for us at our schools. I didn't really teach students. I was leading, drama clubs, writing groups, working with Korean teachers that wanted to improve their English. That was more of what I did then. And I know that then in around 2011, 2012, there were changes going around that made the program much more structured in terms of teaching hours and things like that. So coming into the program, we really didn't feel like we were qualified in any way to teach. What we wanted to do was just exchange culture. And the thing is, with our experience in Cheonan at the time, there was no English really at all. Especially when we're trying to, communicate with the managers to find out what to do. So my strongest memories of the time are attending, sports events, festivals, music performances and things, and just spending time with the NKD community locally. And I know that I certainly learned a lot more Korean language than I ever, I think, was able to convey any of the English language. But yeah, it's absolutely, when I think back to those first few months, really, really special moments in my grant year. And I think really one of the early factors in what made me want to continue my stay, I think, in Korea.
Well, that's awesome. I know when we talked earlier too, we heard a little bit maybe about the difficulties at the time. Is that something that you can elaborate on?
Certainly. So obviously we had full support from Fulbright at the time, and we had obviously the support amongst ourselves, but we received initially some rather contentious feedback from our homestays and our schools at the time. And initially it was rather calm, but as time went on, we were told, several of us at our schools, myself in particular, told to cease and desist any interactions with the NKD community, either locally or elsewhere. And so, when you're new to a country and a culture, and this is also your job in a way, to have essentially your manager tell you to not become involved, certainly made us very nervous as a group. But honestly, we just said, well, this is our non-work time. And so we pursued, even though it was not exactly acceptable at the time.
Thank you for sharing. I think when I initially heard your story, I was surprised by how different it seems the perception is maybe of ETA spending their time outside of the classroom, but also just of interacting with the community at large. And I think it's a very stark difference to maybe what the program looks like now with ETA's place at NKD schools, which I think, Josh, what was that experience like teaching NKD students and being their full-time teacher?
Yeah, I mean, it was in many ways totally different than my first year at a public elementary school. It's quite the opposite, actually, because I was teaching older students, mostly kind of late teens, early 20s, even up to kind of mid 30s, I think. And so that was already a change. I couldn't necessarily be that fun elementary teacher with my PowerPoint, games and everything. It was a little more calm, and I had to change my teaching style a lot to really suit those age differences. And I also really had to be probably the most adaptable that I've ever been in my life, because NKD schools, as I'm sure any teacher who's worked there will tell you, like, they're constantly changing, their students constantly coming in and out. And I think that's kind of a common thread between like a lot of alternative schools. And so I had to really be on my toes and always try to look 2 steps ahead to try to predict what was going to happen. But it really demanded adaptability, and I gained a lot of that skill definitely during that year. And then also I learned about the kind of 2 groups that often attend these NKD alternative schools, one being people who directly come from North Korea. And at my school, those tended to be maybe adults in their late teens, early 20s. But then, and this is something that I don't think gets a lot of attention, there's this other group who are kind of the sons and the daughters of NKD people, oftentimes having one parent from North Korea and having one parent from another country. At my school, it tended to be China. And those students don't get a lot of the kind of spotlight, but those students have this really interesting story. And also, I think as Songju was saying, like, who am I? Because they have a connection to North Korea, they have a connection in China, growing up there, and oftentimes speaking that as their mother tongue, Chinese, and then kind of moving and then living and then acclimating to South Korea. And then it's kind of this identity trifecta. And that was something that I actually didn't know about, despite having some experience, as I said before, with NKD students. And so that was really, really interesting to me. And I really wanted to dive into that and try to understand those students more, because I don't think that I really learned a lot about that, in the US or even in the news. So yeah, it was just a lot of challenges and a lot of learning, but I really loved that the classes were smaller and that I could learn more about my students and that I could engage them directly. And oftentimes I had kind of one-on-one or one-on-two classes. And so I was able to really, really interact a lot with the students, and that was really meaningful and special.
That's awesome. I think I see kind of this theme of spending a lot of one-on-one time with students. I think in all of your stories where you're able to spend a little bit more quality time, I guess you could say, with these students, and that lets you have another perspective on what their experience is like. And kind of on that same vein, we talk about connection with Fulbright and kind of how those cross-cultural experiences affect you. How has your experience maybe with creating connections with the NKD community, or maybe just with your communities while you were here as active ETAs, kind of changed your understanding of the world and yourself? And Josh, I think we'll actually go back to you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on a long time about this, but to keep it short, I think that my experience with particularly NKD students and working at an NKD alternative school has really redefined my understanding of resilience in many ways. And so going forward, I just have a kind of different understanding of what it means to be resilient, and that people are much more complex than we look, and that you really can't tell someone's story from just looking at them. Because a lot of times when I would say to my Korean friends or colleagues who maybe didn't know a lot about the NKD community, I said, oh, I work at a alternative school for NKD students and I do this and that. And they said, oh, like, I didn't even know those schools existed. I've never even met someone from North Korea, and I said, I've never seen someone from North Korea, etc. And I said, well, maybe you don't know that, first of all, right? But it just really showed me that everyone has these kind of compelling stories, and to really connect with people, it's really great to both share your story and also be a really, really good and active listener and try to connect. Because even though I had totally different stories than all of my students, we were still able to connect over the silliest things, whether it was food, whether it was dramas. And so you can find connection anywhere if you're really willing to go deep and find them.
Thank you. And I saw everyone's reactions when he said, maybe you don't know that you've met a North Korean before. I think maybe Patrick, would you be able to kind of also elaborate on your connections with the NKD community as a Fulbrighter, how that's maybe changed your understanding of the world, especially considering, I think, what we see behind you on the screen too?
Sure. Well, I mean, it was very formative. I mean, again, personally meaningful because of my family, but also helped shape my career path, which is the experience of forming these connections and helping build the bridges of mutual understanding that's so central to the Fulbright program is also kind of what I hope to do in my career as a foreign service officer. I think the experience writ large made me aware of not just sort of conversations like this, which are more structured and organized, but also being aware of the daily opportunities to help build that understanding. And so the story that I think is a good example of this is actually related to, is applicable to North Korea, but also in the South. So with my homestay family, actually. And it was Chuseok, which is a major holiday in the fall. And I remember my homestay father is the eldest son. And so everyone comes to his house. And the family members are all kind of asking me questions about America and what's this like and what's that like. And my homestay grandfather asked me this question that I'll never forget. And he says, oh, do Americans love their children? And I was kind of flabbergasted because I didn't know how to respond to that. But thinking about it, what he meant was, in Korea, it's very common for people to live with their family until they get married, whereas in America, usually at 18, we leave the house. And so what he was getting at is, why do American families kind of cast out or reject their children? But at the time, I didn't quite know what to say, so I said some platitude and then kind of moved on. And then fast forward a year, and I'm back visiting my family, which doesn't really know a whole lot about Korea, and they're talking about the student experience and sort of the intense, especially high school education. And I'm going through the rigorous exam process and the sort of after school study centers. And one of my relatives said, "Oh, wow, how can they do that to their children?" Which is an echo of the same comment. And in that moment, I could have said something, kind of tossed it aside about, "Oh yeah, it's very different," or whatever. But instead, I think that was an opportunity to talk about values, right? Korea values education so much. And here's why, right? The lack of resources, human capital is really necessary. Or conversely, thinking back to my experience in Korea, Americans value individualism so much, and here's why. And those sorts of conversations are not kind of magic bullets, but if you can shift the conversation about values, then suddenly you're having a different, a more textured and rich conversation that can lead you in different directions. And so, and in particular, when thinking about a community like Americans and North Koreans, that focus on shared values cuts across any number of differences. And so I think that we're all able, as long as we have the courage to have and sort of extend the energy to have those conversations in our daily lived experiences, then everyone is better off, because that's how you really promote that kind of understanding.
Thank you. I think that it's such an interesting thing they say, like a really textured conversation, and just kind of restructuring kind of what the conversation is about, to make it something that everybody can relate to and everybody can kind of bring their perspective to. I think that's really important in trying to foster cross-cultural relations and just understanding. Dr. Poole, you've been in Korea for quite some time, but I know that you've also traveled to other countries. How has this cross-cultural experience that you had as a young postgraduate affected you and your life and your professional life so far?
Well, certainly with my interactions with the NKD community, I think that was really kind of the first of what is now what I focus on in my research. It really has led to my teaching philosophy in the classes that I lead in the university, that just keeping to cultural exchange and understanding, in Korea right now, universities have a rather rapid influx of international students. And the universities are kind of trying to create an environment that's very inclusive and very welcoming, but there's a lot of kickback just simply because there are a lot of non-Koreans suddenly in Korea. And I think, going back to my days working with the NKD community, it was a really interesting time where, we couldn't communicate well. We had very, very different perspectives on the world and understanding things. And through sharing, it was possible to really connect and to establish these relationships and to feel like you form that sense of belonging. And I think that's a really hard thing, when you're, experiencing, say, a new culture like Korea as an ETA, and in a variety of other contexts, that to develop a sense of belonging is a challenge. And there's a lot of reasons why that is inhibited. But I think, yeah, even from my very early days, that's where one of my first experiences feeling like this was a place that I wanted to be, was with my interactions with the NKD community.
Thank you. that idea of belonging and that identity, I think, is very important and something that maybe everyone who goes into a new space needs to struggle with a bit to figure out where it is that they are and where it is that they fit in. And I think we're coming up on the end of our panel, but I want to allow a little bit of time for maybe everybody to either say kind of what your future goals are, or if there's anything that you'd like to share with the Fulbright community at large. I know that we have some people that aren't in the Fulbright Korea community. And Aaron, your mic is still on, so I'm just gonna stop with you.
Well, first, especially with the introduction and looking at the photos that were shared in the opening presentation, and also just hearing some of the programs that are very much part of the Fulbright Commission in Korea now, it's just mind-blowing, just to kind of go back to those early days and to see the differences. And like with Joshua, you know, like actually being at an NKD school, it sounds very foreign to me. And that's partially my fault for not kind of keeping in touch with the Fulbright Commission over the last few years. But I'm just intensely impressed. And I hope that now that we've reconnected through this webinar and our communications back and forth, that I can kind of reconnect in that sense and really find out what the Commission is actively doing.
Yeah, most definitely. We will definitely keep in touch. Our alumni are really important to us. So we're looking forward to seeing you and other things, Aaron. Patrick, would you like to say anything?
You know, I echo Aaron's comments, really. I mean, Fulbright was one of the most formative experiences of my life, not just in shaping career prospects and kind of views of the world, but also the friendships and relations I had with my defector partners, with my homestay family, friends I've made in Korea, and then of course my fellow grantees. It seems like every year there's another wedding, or people having kids. In fact, I'm going back to the States this summer, and there are a couple Fulbright weddings that I'm going to be going to, and so it's as Aaron was saying, it's funny to look back on how, and inspiring to see how the program continues with its mission of forming these connections. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for organizing the event. It's been really inspiring.
Thank you. We really appreciate having you, and we're sure that you're really busy, but we're glad that you're able to join us today. Josh, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
I would just agree with Patrick saying that Fulbright has been a really formative experience for me, and actually really informed my decision to apply to graduate school and pursue a PhD, not just in psychology, but really in educational and community psychology, focusing on students and especially focusing on alternative schools and how to make schools better environments socially as well as emotionally for students, because schools often focus on the academic and kind of tests and things like that, but students spend tons of time there, and teachers have to wear lots and lots of hats, as I definitely seen at my last school. So I'm really excited to conduct research and dive more into that in the next few years.
We're excited for you. And so with that, I'm going to start wrapping up our panel, but I do want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I think that your perspectives were great to hear, all of your history with the program. And I think I speak for our office when I say that we're really proud of how far our alumni have come. And we wish you the best in your research interest, in your professional interest, and we hope to see you around soon. Thank you.